All right, so let's go on to using template strings with functions. So before I get into the next part of the coding exercise, I just want to introduce you to some syntax. I don't know if you've seen it before, but it's pretty popular now. There's something called GraphQL, and essentially you can use GraphQL to basically make queries to databases that are a little bit shorter in syntax as opposed to writing out long SQL style syntax, or maybe JSON style syntax. If this is really foreign to you and you're like, what are you saying? You suddenly like completely jump to something really advanced. That's okay. I just want you to basically get the idea that this is actually happening through a template string. And eventually when you start coding with functions and using ES6 in more advanced cases, you will probably run into syntax that looks like this. So I just wanted to get you prepared for it, right? Essentially, though, don't feel like this is overwhelmingly scary to you. It's still the same thing that you've always seen so far with me, except for maybe this statement here. And I'll come to that at the end of this ES6 series. But essentially, here's another const keyword, right? And then this is a variable called query. And then basically, I'm using a function basically called GraphQL. And instead of passing it a variable, I am giving it a template string, and the template string acts like a function would. So if you've ever used any JavaScript functions, right, you know that you just basically, here we go, we've done it already. You pass in the variable name, and then the function executes some command. So in this case, it console logs to our console whatever the result is. That's what we've been doing so far. You can assume that GraphQL does something with whatever we pass it, a template string, and then basically gives you the result back in the query, right? And this is a pretty common workflow if you're using things like Gatsby.js to do, maybe some web development. I'll go over that in a separate playlist, and I'll definitely have a card about what all that is soon. But yeah, just I wanted to give you some basic. I wanted to preview like something advanced that you could do with the stuff you're learning right now. We'll come back to this. Okay, but we're going to take a look at this for now, so we kind of digest and better understand what it is these template strings can really do that are really powerful. So the thing about template strings is you can use them like functions. So because I know some of you might be newbies and trying to learn ES6 for the first time as well as JavaScript, I'm just going to demonstrate what a function is and how to make one, and then how to like call the function as well, right? So just continuing, actually I'm going to create a new file here. So I'm just going to do file, new file, but I'm actually going to hit Command N on my keyboard to just do it fast. So I have a new file here, and then I'm going to hit Command S to save it. And I'm just going to call this functions.js. And this is just going to be a really basic thing, especially for people who already kind of know how this works. But just to give you a review, I can make a function either by just saying function hello, and pass in, so this thing here, first of all, is called a function declaration, and then whatever I want to put inside my function to do something with, I can create what's called a parameter, so content, for example. And you can customize functions to however you like. All you have to do is just create the function with the keyword function, and then the name of the function, and then whatever you want to send to the function. So you can have multiple parameters if you want, content1, content2, and you can name these whatever you want as well. So some people just like say, so revising this, I might actually say sum, and then num1, and then num2, right? And that's actually a good one. So I'm going to return, right, num1 plus num2. And I can call this function. Remember, this is just declaring, making the function, defining what this sum function should do, but it doesn't actually execute on its own until you actually call the function. So if I write in 1 and 2 here, and then I store it in some variable, obviously, var result, that's what people usually do, and then I console.log the result, then I go over to my terminal and I say node, and I call this functions.js. I get back 3. So 1 plus 2 is 3. So return gives me a return value that I can save in a variable somewhere, right? And then that result I can print to the command line. There are other ways to write functions as well. I can store them in variables instead. So I can say let multiply equal to a function. And in this case, this function has no name. It's an anonymous function. Again, this might be review for people who already know this. But I could say, all right, I want to have two parameters again, num1, num2. And just for the heck of it, I will just shorten these. So n1 plus n2. So notice again, you can customize these as you like. You can make them whatever variable names as you want. You don't need to include the let or the var or the const with these variable names, because JavaScript will do that for you behind the scenes when you create a function. You just need to basically create the variables as parameters and then define what this function multiply should do. In this case, we're saying we want to return n1 times n2, right? So the star sign is the multiply statement. And then I'll end this with a semicolon because this is a statement. And then basically I can do multiply, and I'll say 3 and 4, right? And again, I need to sort in some variables. So I'll just say let result 2, and I have to have it always, whenever you create a variable, you can't have any spaces between variable names that will break the variable. So you always have to have variables as one word. So result 2, and then console.log result 2. So save that and then run it again. So now I have 3 and 12, and we know that 3 comes from the addition, as well as 3 and 4. 3 times 4 is 12. So that's how we get 12. So up till this point, you should be pretty good with regular JavaScript functions. This was just review. So I'm actually going to create another file here, and I'm going to call this functions.js2, or actually I'm going to call it template functions. All right. Now that we know the basics, let's go ahead and make template functions.js. Okay, so let's break down what's happening here, right? So we have the same exact syntax that we had from before. We had we have similar syntax to what we had before. We have a variable, but in this case we're calling it parse template, and we have it set to equal an anonymous function, and it's going to have 3 different parameters here. So instead of 2, we define this function to have 3 parameters, and those parameters will show up later when we use our template string here. So I'll show you how that works. So first we're going to get back our text, and then variable 1 and variable 2, right? Then we're going to console log each parameter, right? So we're going to say text, variable 1, and then variable 2, and then just for fun we'll return back variable 2. Okay, so I'm going to skip these for a second, and then I'm just going to go straight to result. So parse template, remember this is a function's name, and instead of using parentheses as you might use for a regular function, we're going to just send it a template string. So here we're going to say I have to do my item 1 and item 2. If you remember, this is plugin syntax, so I'm saying item 1 is equal to laundry, and item 2 is equal to function return groceries. So here it is where I'm going to plug in item 2, and here's where I'm going to plug in item 1. So this whole string should become I have to do my laundry and function return groceries. Okay, so let's see what this returns us using the actual code. So I'm going to copy this code from the slides, and I am just going to pull up my template functions one more time, and I'm going to paste that in here. And what I want to do is essentially take a look first at result. So I'm going to comment this one, and I just hit command and then / on my, I think it's forward bracket on my Visual Studio Code if you're interested in how to do quick commands to comment. But here I'm just going to say console log result, and we'll take a look at it. So save, and I need to spell result right in order for this to work. So I'm going to say node template functions JS. And if you notice, I get back the text, which is in an array. So I'm basically getting back my parsed template as an array. And then you look at it, you see, oh, okay, I have in index 1 or index 0, the first index, I have inside the array, I have to do my, and then blank. And then it stops at the space before the plugin, the first variable, right? And then the second part of the template string is this and. So you can almost imagine, like, when you pass a template string over to a function, it takes your template string and then breaks it down into just the string parts and then gives you back an array of all the different string parts. Anytime it encounters a variable, like item 1 or item 2, it stores those as extra parameters or arguments when you're using the function, right? So those things are available to you as secondary parameters. So first you get back all the text as an array, and then you get your variable, and then you get your other variable. So that's why I'm able to console log the text. And then if I look at the second line, it should say variable, which is laundry. And then the third line, which is variable 2, which is this function, right? And that's why it's showing me function. And then of course, return variable, which is also the function. So this is a little bit complicated in that I threw in this function at the end, right? I could have just made this, another string. I could have made this a number like 23, and then we would have seen 23 instead of a function. But that's the reason I did it this way, is just to make it a little bit more challenging for you, and to show you that in addition to returning text and numbers, you can also return functions, which is a very common pattern, design pattern in JavaScript. A lot of people will return a function from one function to do some other function, right? And then that function may return another function which does another action. So you can almost think of it as like chaining different functions. So in order for me to actually do something with item 2, I might actually have to call it here. So I'm going to do that by using the parameters. And this is just function call. Again, remember we did some basic syntax of showing you how to call a function. When you call the function, you have to actually add the parameters here and then pass in the arguments, right? As opposed to, this is parameters when you define the function, but when you are actually calling the function, these are arguments. And so these are actual numbers that you're going to use. That's the big distinction. Okay, so let's take a look and see what we get now with the result. So I have to do my laundry and my groceries, right? And because now I'm calling item 2 inside the plugin syntax, I get back a full statement. I have to do my laundries and groceries. And so if I pull this back and uncomment it, and I return this to the syntax that you saw in the slides, if I do node one more time, and I'm actually going to comment this out so I don't get an error, then you'll see I get finished with groceries. So I have to do my item 1, which is laundry, and then finished with result, which is the value of this, right? So I know it's a little bit weird, but you have to follow me, right? I made a function execute here. Well, I passed a function here, and then I make the function which has been returned from parse template into result execute here, and that finishes the statement. So again, a little bit of a strange example, but the reason I wanted to show that to you is because that kind of power plays back into this, right? The whole GraphQL thing, right? You make this kind of query, and then you go and try to get all the WordPress posts, and you get all the different nodes and elements that are inside of it, like titles, excerpts, links. And this is a shorter way of writing, maybe some database language stuff. But essentially that wraps all back up into GraphQL, and then GraphQL gives you back a query after firing maybe some various functions inside. So I hope that made sense. A little bit more of an advanced tutorial this time, but I hope now you can see the power of some really solid ES6 in play.